Welcome to my channel. This is an indication of some of the things that I cover on a regular basis in my videos. If you haven't already subscribed, please feel free to do so, and don't forget to click the little bell so that you'll get notified of future videos. Please feel free to share my videos on your social media, and I hope you enjoy the video which follows. Well, hello everybody. This is Friday, July 19th when I'm starting this video. It won't go out for another week yet. Actually, my latest video doesn't come out until this evening, but I'm doing some different things in the garden, so I thought I'd start making the video. I've just spent an hour and a half in the heat reclaiming this large raised bed. It was one mass of weeds. What you're looking at there now are my alpine strawberries, and I'll try to get you a close-up of some of the fruit. I guess we're looking at the right plant. That plant has two berries that are ripe and a third one you probably can't see down below that is ripening. I love the things. They're very small. I'll get a hand in there if I can to show you. Larger than a wild strawberry, but they're a small berry. And each plant only produces maybe a couple of berries that are ripe per day. So you would have to have a large acreage of these things if you were going to do anything like make jam or whatever with them, unless what I've done in the past is pick them and freeze them, and when you get enough, thaw them up and make jam or whatever. But I don't do that anymore. I eat them mostly fresh right here in the garden, and they don't produce runners if you have never grown alpines. So the only way to increase your amount is to do root divisions. Probably early in the spring would be the best. Divide them and make more plants out of it. They just do not produce a runner at all. I tried growing strawberries in this bed last year, and I bought bare root, came by mail. I won't mean-mouth the company that I bought them from because they're very reputable. If I had bothered to contact them and complain, they would have given me a full refund, but for some reason I didn't do that, and now it's a year later. There were 25. I'm quite sure there were only 4 that started to grow, and all 4 have survived the winter here, and I just dug them out of the weeds. Should they happen to produce runners, I'll multiply them, but I'll show you what I've got in mind for the bed right now. A large Canadian supermarket chain called Sobeys. Sobeys here in the Maritimes. I think in other provinces it might be called Loblaws. Anyway, we have Angel photobombing us again. They have a temporary garden center in the spring, trying to cut in on the local businesses, and I rarely ever buy from them. They bring in a lot of things that look really good, but they're not for our zone, our climate. But I was at this particular store doing some grocery shopping and noticed a sign that said, buy one, get one free, everything in the garden center. So you bought one at the regular price and got the next one free, or you took an equivalent amount of other plants if you wanted them. So I went over and looked around, and they had these big pots of raspberry canes, raspberry vines, whatever you want to call them. Unfortunately, I've left the tag up at the house. The tag had a color photograph. Each pot contains 3 different kinds of raspberries. And it doesn't tell you if they're early season, mid-season, late season, or what. It just shows a picture of the raspberries. There's one that has yellow, one that has red, and one that has black raspberries. And the tag sort of indicates that you would plant them all 3 together. Well, I'm not planning to do that, but we'll see what happens when I turn them out of the pots here. If they can be easily divided, I'll plant each one individually. And hopefully that's something that will survive and grow nicely in this bed. The bed has got to be over 10 years old. The boards that are holding it together are starting to decay and fall apart. I have never liked it. It was, I think, probably the first raised bed that I ever built. My problem with it is it's far too wide. You can't reach into the center of it from either side, so you pretty much have to step up into it to do anything with whatever's planted in the center. And I'm thinking that raspberries will do quite nicely. It is so hot. I should take Angel back to the house in the air conditioning, but she always wants to be with me. It's close to 30 degrees here, probably about 28 right now, but there is a bit of a breeze. Knock this first one out of the pot and see what we've got here. not exactly root mound or anything. And there clearly is 3 different plants. Not so sure that I can divide them though without destroying something, we'll see. I don't want to kill them. I may take a knife and see what happens here. Divide them with just by hands, just teasing them apart. Got 3 good looking plants, so I'll get them planted quickly before they dry out here in the sun. Well, they're in, not in nice neat little rows, but here, there, and everywhere. And when separated, some of them were considerably smaller than others, but they all look nice and healthy. I really don't know much about raspberries, but I'm not expecting to get very much, if anything, off of them in the first year. I do see 1 or 2 plants that has a couple of green berries on it. They may ripen, and I'll find out at least what color those 2 are. But I'll keep them nicely watered, and hopefully next year I'll have a crop of 3 colors of raspberries. I'm not hemorrhaging. I've been picking Haskaps. Someone told me that if I let them go until they were very, very ripe, they would be sweeter. Well, I guess they are marginally sweeter. I have 3 bushes. I'm trying to show you the difference here. Large ones. You can see the difference there in the size. Oops, am I even in focus here? Can't find it. Okay. Stop talking to myself now and talk to you. The large ones are off of the 2 bushes that are either side of the one that is supposed to be a pollinator. And the pollinator has these little tiny ones on it, but it's by far the largest bush. Much taller and wider and lots of fruit. Anyway, I don't know how much I've got there for fruit. Maybe 3 cups, possibly a quart, I don't know. I'm going to try to make a small batch of jam and see if I like that any better than the Haskap fruit itself. I'm just eating one now. Even letting them go so long that they're just about ready to fall off the plant, they're still quite sour. I'm not terribly impressed. Maybe I'll like the jam. I'll let you know. I was at Canada Green yesterday, which is my favorite garden center. It's in St. George, New Brunswick. And now that we have car ferry service again this summer, I'm able to get there quite easily. It isn't very far from where the car ferry landing is on the mainland. This is one of my coal plants. I spoke with a lady in their U-Pick tomato greenhouse. They have a huge greenhouse with, I think it was 3 varieties of heirloom tomatoes growing in it, all indeterminate, growing up the same sort of system that I use here with line to attach them to. For my indeterminates anyway, my determinates, I think I should have done the same thing. They're kind of getting out of control here. And the lady showed me a few things that they do to get larger tomatoes and to get them to ripen sooner. I'm very interested. I'm going to try it. I'm not doing it to all of my tomatoes. I've already done part of it to this plant. You find a truss like this and you cut off, I'll take that sucker out of there anyway, but you cut off the leaf that's directly above it, the first leaf, and that was up there. And the part that really hurts is she came in and took off about half of the tomatoes, taking off those small ones and discarding the things. You could, I told her, and she agreed, that with the large varieties that she was growing, they could also sell the green tomatoes for people that like to make chow chow or chutney or whatever out of green tomatoes. It's easier to show the cutting off of the leaf on an indeterminate, so I'll move over to an indeterminate plant here. Well, this is Wenzel, and that's the first tomato right there that formed in here. It had 1 or 2 more. I've already clipped them off, and I took this leaf off up here, but this leaf here is really the first above it, so I'm removing that too. And up above here on the same plant, if I can get it to go in focus here, we have a large truss of blossoms. And I've already done that. I removed the leaf that was above it. Nothing has formed yet. They're just starting to bloom, but I will maybe allow one on each of those where the truss divided. And we'll see later on in the season if it makes a big difference for me. It certainly was making a big difference at the Canada Green greenhouses. Beautiful tomatoes. I didn't have my camera with me. I come home and thought about, wouldn't it be nice to do an interview with that lady? So I called and spoke with the owner, and she would have loved me to be able to do it. That was the lady's last day of working there until September, and she was leaving for Ontario that afternoon, so no luck interviewing her. The owner, I'm sure, if I'd asked, she's a very nice lady, a Greek immigrant here in Canada. I'm not sure how many decades she may have lived in Canada. The Canada Green's been there quite a few years, but she still has a lovely Greek accent. I'm sure if I'd asked her, she would have agreed to do it, but she is always so busy when I'm there. I would feel guilty about asking her to take some of her time to do that for me. So maybe some other year or later in the fall, when the lady comes back off of her trip, I'll get an interview with her. But she was certainly very knowledgeable about how you grow tomatoes. So I'm hoping that I have some added success from her suggestions. Well, I've picked them over, measured them, removed anything that I could find anyway by the way of stems or a leaf or whatever that got in there. There's over 4 cups, and as you can see, I'm mashing them up a bit. Not quite 5 cups. I'm going to make the jam the old traditional way. I'm not going to use any bought-in pectin or anything. Cook them until they reach 220 degrees Fahrenheit, 104 degrees Celsius. And that is the stage at which jam should set. Usually works anyway. Can't imagine that you'd need much pectin with these, as sour as they are. Sour is usually an indication of lots of pectin. That was 4 cups of plain white sugar. And that's the only thing I'm adding to this. With other kinds of fruit, you could add some lemon juice to increase the acidity, or these are plenty sour enough already. They don't need the lemon juice. So I'll take these over to the stove and start cooking them. I was looking online to find a recipe specifically for Haskaps and couldn't find one, but just using a berry recipe here. But I was reminded of some of the things that turned up. Haskaps are also called honeyberries. Whoever it was that named these things honeyberries certainly had a great sense of humor. They don't resemble anything sweet like honey in the least. It's kind of a pretty color there now, though. Perhaps it will make a decent jam. Well, that didn't take too long. It just reached 320 degrees Fahrenheit, and I think I gave the incorrect Celsius temperature. It's 1 degree more. It should be 105 degrees Celsius. I'll shut the heat off and stir until most of that foam on the surface has disappeared, and then we'll put this in the jam jars. I've got 3 500 milliliter or pint jars sterilized and ready, but I think those be enough for maybe 2 jars and possibly a bit left over, but probably not. It doesn't look like it's much more than a liter there, a couple of pints. Still piping hot, but I got rid of most of the foam anyway. Let's see if I can get it in the jars without making too much of a mess. Still a very pretty color. And it does smell good, so maybe I'll be pleasantly surprised and glad that I have my Haskap bushes. Well, I'll show you the finished product when I get it. But I guess right now I should probably put a lid on that before it starts cooling down. I sterilized the jars and the lids, but the rings don't come in contact with anything, so that isn't necessary. Bring you back in a few minutes. Well, I was right. There was just enough to fill 2-pint jars. There was a little bit of the juice left in the bottom of the pot, and I did taste it took a spoon and tasted it. It does have a very nice flavor. I will leave these sitting here for 12 to 24 hours without disturbing them too much to see if they set up, and also make sure that the jars seal, but I'll wait a couple of months or so before I try it. The stuff is always much better after it's had a chance to mature for a little while. So here's hoping that I like the final product. I'll let you know when I do a taste test. One of the hens is bragging about the egg that she just laid. It's July 22nd. I've just been out to the garden and picked my peas, all of the peas, whether the pods were full or only partially full, because I want to prepare that bed and get my turnips transplanted into it later today. I think I'm quite pleased with that. It's only a 4-foot square area, and I don't know what that stock pot holds, but it's more than 3/4 full. I'll show you later on, after I finish shelling them, what I get out of it. The variety is called Spring, which is a bush type, a short vining type of peas. I don't know if maybe all bush peas are smaller pods, but I've got pods that have 1 pea in it, and I think the highest is probably about 6, but if I finish shelling, I'll let you know if I find anything with more than that in it, but I've been eating a number of them green, and they are delicious. Well, I just finished shelling out the peas. I've already added water, but they're not floating or anything, but I don't know. I didn't measure. I wouldn't say much more than 3 cups. All kinds of sizes, very small to fairly large. Like I said before, those pea pods are very small. A lot of the pods only had 2 or 3 in it. I don't think I ever saw one with more than 6. They're tasty. I've been eating them raw. I don't think I would grow that particular variety again. Next year I'll have to select a different variety, I guess. But these will be much appreciated this evening with dinner. Well, if you can make out the occasional little green plant, other than the weeds that might still be there, here, there, and everywhere, those are my turnips. This is the bed that I took the peas out of earlier today, and I've just finished preparing it and planting my turnips, or rutabagas, or Swedes, whatever you prefer to call them. They're still quite small, 2 leaves, most of them. Some of them have got 3 leaves. What will be interesting to see is how many of them will still be in the ground tomorrow morning. The raspberry plants that I planted earlier in this video, the next morning 2 of them had been dug up. Whatever it is, I don't know. I'm blaming raccoons. It could be porcupines, but wherever I dig, they come behind me and dig to see if there's anything worth eating, is my theory, anyway. It is the 22nd of July, as I said a bit ago. I think this is the latest I've ever transplanted my turnips, so I don't expect to get very large ones, but hopefully I'll get usable turnips out of them. We don't harvest them here anyway until after there have been 3 or 4 really hard frosts, so that'll be sometime in October. So I'm sure something will develop. If I plant them early in the season, too early in the season, I get things that weigh 10 to 12 pounds, and what do you do with a 12-pound turnip? I would like to have something that weighs a pound or 2, so time will tell what happens, but I'm glad I've got them in. I sort of used the square-foot gardening method I used to use years ago. There are 16 plants in this bed that's 4 foot square. Each one has a square foot to grow in. The turnip itself isn't that big, but they put on a lot of growth in the tops, the leaves. So if that should happen, if I'm fortunate enough that that happens. Well, that is that little chore done, and it's just starting to sprinkle. It's going to supposedly a lot of rain tomorrow. We can't seem to have a week without a day that has a lot of rain. Already yesterday we had, well, a lot of rain in a short period of time. We had a thunderstorm and a downpour. Anyway, we get whatever we get, I guess. Dinner is served. Garden fresh peas, new potatoes, and fried haddock. Unfortunately, the new potatoes did not come out of my garden. They're store-bought. I probably have usable potatoes out there if I wanted to empty out one of the containers, but I want them to grow to their full potential before I do that. Well, a few of the cucumber plants are in view. This is 12 days after they had their first feeding of Miracle-Gro. I won't say Miracle Whip this time like I did in the last video. Why I said Miracle Whip I don't know, because I despise the stuff. Anyway, they've now had 2 applications of Miracle-Gro. And the difference in these plants in here is amazing. They've more than tripled in size, and now that they have bigger leaves, of course, they're going to grow even faster. I'll take you inside and show you one. I don't know which variety it is, but this one actually has a cucumber starting. As I've said many times before, the 3 varieties that I'm growing, the European gherkin, one called Mini Crunch, and one called Lisboa, which is what the Portuguese call Lisbon. We should be calling it Lisboa too, I suspect, but we tend to change names, don't we? All 3 of the varieties are what they call parthenocarpic. They're all female blossoms, and no need for pollination to form a cucumber. I no longer know what the varieties are. I have lots of little white tags with nothing written on them. The indelible waterproof marker that I used was made in China. Evidently, indelible and waterproof means something else in China, because mine are now blank slates. I just know the plants are growing. Should be able to identify them when they start forming fruit, but it doesn't make much difference. That's the first one to bloom, which is encouraging, and it's sort of starting a runner there in the center, if you can see, and there's a little tendril sticking out there, so that's what I'm hoping to see so I can grow them up the sides of the cage here. This is the Italian summer squash, a zucchini or a zucchini type squash anyway, called Cocosella, and I had 3, lost 1. If you can see in the background there where I lost one, I stuck in a tomato plant. I don't know what the variety is, but at least it's got a flower on it and a couple of tiny green tomatoes. But these have done the best of any of the squash plants since I started feeding them. I'll show you the other winter squash in just a second. I think part of the problem is last year I started gardening in several of these beds with the Ruth Stoat method of gardening. Hay or straw is added to the top of the bed every year and to cover up weeds and things that start to grow in the summer. What I was sort of ignoring is it takes 3 to 4 years for this to get into full production, for the hay down below to be composting, decomposing enough that it's putting enough nutrients in the soil for everything to grow. 1 year just isn't enough, so it should have had a compost or some sort of fertilizer added, and I didn't do that. And a lesson learned. For another 2 or 3 years I will continue to add probably Miracle-Gro or something like that to the plants as they grow, and then after that hopefully the Ruth Stoat method will take over and work for me. Quick look at those turnips that I planted the other day. It's only been, I think, 2 days. This is the 3rd day since they were planted, and they've already started putting on more leaves and are growing larger, so that's what I wanted to see. Well, as I said just a few seconds ago there, I no longer know which variety is which. There are 4 4-foot square, what were raised beds. They still are raised, but I removed the wooden sidewalls a year ago and started the Ruth Stoat method. I have lost, let me see, I've lost 2, I guess, squash plants. And it wasn't to slugs or anything, it's to whatever the miserable creature is that's digging up my plants. Seems to, in the last few days, seems to have stopped. After I replanted the raspberry plants, they've stayed in the ground, and nothing has touched the turnips that I planted, but doesn't mean that they won't at some point. I'll give you a closer look at one of the varieties here. You can see Angel's photobombing again down there in the corner. As you can see, this has started to vine or trail, whatever you want to call it. It's got a branch starting off to the right there. And whatever this variety is, the other three plants as well as this one have a lot of blossom buds on them. Nothing has opened yet. And what I'm seeing is mostly male blossoms. I don't think, if I say mostly, I don't think I found a female yet, but that is quite typical. Squash and the ordinary cucumber, not the parthenocarpic variety, they all seem to start with a lot of male blossoms, but the growth is very impressive in 12 days. These were tiny little things 12 days ago, so perhaps we have growing season enough left that I'll get a squash. I'm sure the cucumbers will do fine, but squash take longer to mature. And if I keep them growing rapidly enough, perhaps by mid-September before we get frost, I'll have some squash to try. I frequently say I grow my vegetables in what is now an overgrown perennial garden, been ignored for many years. And this is just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. The lower sort of shiny leaves and that trailing thing, if you can see it hanging down there, that's American bittersweet, and I've got an acre of that thing now. The tree that you can see with the blossoms starting on it, that's staghorn sumac, and in the background, that is the cabin, and growing up the cabin is a wild grapevine, which produces lots of grapes, and the birds really enjoy them in the fall. I don't know if I can just swing this over a little bit here. Hopefully, the tallest tree that you can see in the background there is one of my hazel trees. I have 3 hazel trees. I had just had someone this morning leave a comment on one of my videos, wanting to know how the cherry trees did. Well, you're looking at about 1/10 of my crop there. I don't think there's more than 10 cherries on this tree, which is called Juliet. And the other 2, I don't see where they set any fruit at all. But that seems to be quite typical of my fruit trees this year. I don't know what's going on. My plum tree, I was so excited, had lots of blossoms, and the 2 pollinator trees that are next to it had lots of blossoms. I can't find a single plum. They all fell off. Now, we didn't have frost, but we were having cold weather, cool weather, and wet weather. So, I don't know. Pollinators weren't flying. They didn't get pollinated. I have no idea what the excuse is. The Asian pear, I guess, blooms a little later. The Asian pear is doing quite well. It has a lot of pears. I haven't done any thinning yet, probably should, so that some of them will develop larger and get around to that today, hopefully. And I wanted to say something else that one of my subscribers told me that was news to me, but I have no reason to disbelieve them. Both sunflowers and potatoes put out something in the soil that inhibits the growth of other plants around them. Well, up at the community garden, in that little plot that I'm growing, I have potatoes and I have a sunflower in amongst everything else. So I don't know. And my cucumber cage is surrounded by sunflowers. I'd never heard that one before, so if anybody knows anything more about it, feel free to comment. Well, while I was standing right here next to the Asian pear, grafted Asian pear with 5 different kinds of Asian pears on it, I went to the hoop house and got my pruning shears and came back. Every time I found a cluster, I selected the largest fruit and removed the rest. And most clusters have 4 or 5 in it. In the past, I would have left 2 or 3. I'm not getting very big ones, so I'm applying some of the method that I'm trying with the tomatoes. After the lady gave me all the great information on growing tomatoes, I'm applying that to my pear tree as well. I'm thinking if each cluster only has 1 in it, it might grow a larger pear than I've been getting. So we'll see about that come September or so, I guess. Well, I want to show you a few things that's happening in the hoop house, and then I'll give you a look at the onions that I just harvested. I've just pulled all of the ones that were falling over. Looking down between the aisles there, I still see one that's falling over. The boing, boing, boing is coming out of my pocket. It's Messenger. My family is having a great time today. Some of them have gone to Fundy National Park, and we're having a lot of fun going back and forth, and they're showing me photographs now of Fundy National Park. Beautiful area. I'll give you a look at the tomatoes, some of the pruning that I've done, and the benefit that I'm seeing already. The lady really knew what she was talking about. I'm not sure if I'm going to do it to all of my tomatoes or not, because it does cut down on the number of tomatoes, but they're much larger and they ripen faster. So I haven't made that decision yet. This is one of the cole plants, the one that I did remove the leaf that was above this cluster and removed, well, probably half or more than half of the fruit that was on that cluster. This one in particular is getting the nice size, and it's not ripe or anywhere near ripe, but it is changing color, so I expect to see that ripen relatively soon. This is the Wenzel. I did the same thing. I removed the leaf above it, and this of course is a indeterminate, so it's growing to one single stem, and it has increased in size quite a bit, but it's nowhere near as big as a beefsteak should be, not yet anyway, and Wenzel is one of the large varieties that they call a beefsteak. These are the beets that I transplanted. I think that was earlier in this same video, and they're coming along, really starting to grow quite nicely now. Next to it, if I can focus in on the thing, not next to it, but in an aisle further over here, I guess is what I should have said. Those are my jalapenos. Hopefully I have them in view. And I'm starting to get some jalapenos and more blossoms coming up above. What has got me kind of fascinated is what's next to it here. That is the Aztec rainbow. Beautiful plant and still growing nice and tall and strong. Not a blossom, and I don't see a blossom bud anywhere on it, not yet anyway. So, Dave, if you're watching this, I'm sure you are, you can let me know how long it took for yours before they started to bloom. This is the patch of cucumbers that are growing in here. Now you can see there's a big difference. These things like the heat, and they get lots of heat in here. Holes all through the leaves everywhere. I put down some slug bait last night thinking it might be slugs, but I don't know. We have an awful lot of grasshoppers in here. Anybody ever had grasshoppers do that kind of damage? As long as they're not eating the cucumbers and they're producing, I don't mind, I guess. I'll try to get a shot of one of the cucumbers down in there. There are a number of them. Most of them are still quite small, but they're really producing nicely. And I decided the easiest thing to do to show it to you was to pick it. I think that's one of the European gherkins, and that's the size I would like to have when everything gets going here. The ones outside in the cage and the one in here, I'd like to be able to pick enough of those to make pickles. They'd be a great size for dills, but also I want to do lacto-fermented pickles again this year. I haven't done that in a number of years, and that would be a great size. You don't have to cut them at all. I would remove the blossom end, quarter inch or so of that. There's an enzyme there that prevents your pickles from staying crisp. But that is the size that I'm looking for. Well, let's take a look at those onions. Well, I just pulled all of the onions that had fallen over, and after I finished I noticed there's 2 or 3 more that I missed, but I'll go back and get those later. They're small to medium, I guess. Just watched a video on how to grow your perfect onions from somebody down in the southern U.S. where they can get those wonderful onion transplants that I cannot find a source for in Canada. These are the 2 largest that I've brought out yet. That one is the largest so far, and this one here is getting close. There's a few more large ones that still are vertical, so hopefully they will grow a little bit bigger, but regardless of the size, they will be appreciated. I'm just glad that I didn't pull onion sets. I've done that before. Planted onion sets and pulled onion sets that were just a bit larger in the fall, or this time of year when they're ready to harvest. Well, that will conclude this rather lengthy video. If you're still watching, thank you very much for watching.